can we return to democracy? You know, there's one thread that ties together Trump's destruction of American government agencies, his offer to take the Gaza crisis off Israel's hands and dump it on our military. And let me just speak to that very quickly. Netanyahu came over here. And when Netanyahu came over here, he was in an absolute state of crisis because Gaza is a complete mess. He bombed the crap out of it. 90% of all the buildings have been destroyed or damaged. It's going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars, or certainly tens of billions of dollars, to rebuild Gaza. And Israel doesn't want to pay for it. They don't want to do it. They don't want to have anything to do with it. They don't want to occupy Gaza. They don't want to be, I mean, this is the reason why they left Gaza years ago, was because they were tired of having their soldiers be shot at. So Netanyahu comes over here and says, Trump's an idiot. If I flatter him and butter him up, maybe I can get him to take this problem off my hands. And it's exactly what Trump offered to do. I mean, everybody's freaking out about how this is going to blow up the Middle East and everything else, and that's all true. I mean, keep in mind, the reason bin Laden attacked us on 9/11 was because we still had an Air Force base in Saudi Arabia after the first Gulf War. George Herbert Walker Bush negotiated a deal with the Saudis to stage an Air Force base for attacks on Saddam Hussein back in 19 whatever the year was, and as he was running 1992, I believe it was, as he was running against Bill Clinton, he wanted to have this short war. Maybe it was 91, and it turned out to be a 3-day war. But after the war, he didn't close that Air Force base, and bin Laden was just beside himself because American women were walking around with their elbows showing and driving cars. And men were watching pornography and not covering their heads. I mean, not growing beards. I mean, it was just it's blasphemy, right? This is far worse. So, Trump put a target on our backs, but I would say Netanyahu put a target on our backs by suckering Trump into making this stupid suggestion, offering this stupid deal that nobody's ever going to follow. But anyhow, enough of that. There's a common thread that ties together Trump and Musk's destruction of our government agency, his offer to take Gaza off Israel's hands, and our representatives and senators' failure to challenge him. And this is how kingdoms operate, rule by decree, which proves that we're asking the wrong question. If you plug, can American democracy survive Trump, into a search engine, you will see that there are literally hundreds, maybe thousands of websites and blogs and posts and social media posts that literally have that as their headline. Can American democracy survive Trump, or variations thereof? But American democracy was kneecapped by 5 Republicans on the Supreme Court back in 1978 when they ruled that money was the same thing as free speech and corporations are the same thing as persons. I mean, the correct question is, can the American system, now that it's become flooded with dark money and that the right to vote has become a mere privilege in red states, ever again represent the interests of average citizens? Can we ever return to democracy? In an open call on X yesterday with Republican Senators Joni Ernst and Mike Lee, apartheid billionaire Elon Musk, whose father says he was chauffeured to school in White-Run, South Africa in a Rolls Royce, went off on regulations. He says regulations basically should be default gone. Not default there, default gone. And if it turns out that we missed the mark on a regulation, we can always add it back in. And in a childlike echo of Ayn Rand's book, Atlas Shrugged, Musk adds, these regulations are added willy-nilly all the time, so we've just got to do a wholesale spring cleaning of regulation to get the government off the backs of everyday Americans so people can get things done. If the government has millions of regulations holding everyone back, well, that's not freedom. We got to restore freedom. Right. When billionaires talk about freedom, you have to know what they're talking about is they want their taxes cut and they want their companies deregulated so that they can make more profit and screw us. I mean, think about this. Both capitalism and democracy could be viewed as like a game, like a football game. And imagine if the NFL were to say, oh, we've got too many regulations and just suspend them all just, before Sunday's Super Bowl. So the Chiefs, acting like elected Democrats, say, well, we'll continue to play by the old rules. Those worked well. But, the Eagles, they decide to start gut punching and face mask pulling and even throw 5 extra players on the field. The only team that would win under those circumstances would be the one willing to play dirty or buy off the refs. And increasingly, that's where we are today, both with our democracy and our economy. We know this is crazy. Every state in the union has an insurance commissioner because for decades, for a half a century or longer, insurance companies just routinely rip people off. And finally, every state said enough. Same thing with banks and brokerages. We regulate them because the last 2 times we deregulated them in the 1920s and the 1990s, it produced the Republican Great Depression of the 1930s and the Bush crash of 2008. We regulate automobile manufacturers because, hey, when we didn't, Ford killed 900 people with the Pinto, and GM trucks killed 2,000 people with their side saddle gas tanks. We regulate refineries because their emissions cause cancer. We regulate drugs because unscrupulous manufacturers have killed people in previous eras. We regulate workplace safety because the Triangle Shirtwaist fire killed 146 young women. We regulate traffic with signs and stoplights to keep order and reduce accidents. We regulate police to prevent them from abusing innocent people. We regulate building codes so people's houses don't catch on fire or collapse. And there was a time in America when we regulated money and politics and when we guaranteed the right to vote. Those 2 types of regulations were passed back in the 19th century and the early 20th century. In response to multiple scandals, like in 1899 when William Cooper, the second richest guy in America, stood outside the Montana legislature and passed out $1,000 checks to everybody who voted to make him the senator for the state. I mean, that led straight to the Tillman Act. In 1905, under Teddy Roosevelt, it was passed that said no corporation can give money in a in a federal election. Well, it wasn't just Cooper that led to the Tillman Act. It was a whole series of abuses. We passed regulations guaranteeing a minimum wage, unemployment insurance, and the right to unionize in order to create the world's first large-scale middle class. And we regulated the morbidly rich with a 90% income tax rate to prevent them from amassing so much wealth that they could challenge our government, which is, by the way, where we are right now. And of course, it's those regulations, money in politics, regulating money in politics, regulating the right to vote, and preventing the accumulation of dangerous amounts of wealth to which today's broligarchs most strenuously object. In each case, it was 5 Republicans on the U.S. Supreme Court who gutted our protective regulations and put America on a collision course with today's oligarchic neo-fascist takeover. I mean, they ruled that billionaires can buy politicians. It's no longer called bribery, it's called free speech when you give money to a politician in exchange for their votes. They claim that corporations aren't soulless creations of the law, but they're persons with human rights under the Bill of Rights. They claim that voting is not a right in America in open defiance of U.S. law. They said it's a mere privilege, giving the green light to Republicans to purge or refuse to count over 4 million votes in the last election. And the result of all this Republican corruption is that the will of the majority of Americans hasn't happened since the 60s. It was the 60s when we got Medicare and Medicaid and Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act and Title IX, Title X, all of these protections, all of these benefits, food stamps, Section 8 housing, or Section 9, whatever it is, all this stuff, that all happened in the 60s. Why did it stop in the 70s? Because the Supreme Court said that they struck down all these regulations on dark money and big money in politics. And ever since then, big money has frozen us like a mosquito in amber. I mean, even Barack Obama, he wanted to create a national health care system. He had to do it on the platform of for-profit insurance companies, and he couldn't even get the public option through so that you could buy into Medicare at any age, which shouldn't have been that big a lift. But the right-wing billionaires in the insurance industries, they demanded that he bow down to them. Dark money has destroyed the notion of one person, one vote. Elon Musk just bought the White House for Trump for $270 million. Monopolies, allowed because corporations can now buy politicians, have destroyed the small businesses that once filled America's malls and downtowns. And voter suppression and voter list purges that knocked 4 million votes and voters off the rolls in the 2024 election, as Greg Palast documented on this program, gave us Donald Trump. So yeah, Elon, let's do away with all the regulations that these wannabe kings, Donald and Elon, are saying, and let's make America, unregulated, right? Let's make it look and operate like Syria and its failed state relatives. After all, freedom, right? Freedumb.